Hello and welcome back to the Entertainment Vortex. Today we were at Brennan Theaters watching Bad Times at the El Royale. If you haven't already subscribed to this channel, make sure you do. We post multiple videos every single week. I was extremely excited to see this movie after watching the trailers. It looked like it had a lot of twists and turns and a whodunit kind of thing going on. And I have to say I enjoyed the movie quite a bit. It does suffer from one thing that is really prevalent in this movie, and that is bad pacing. Now, I know that myself and JB are going to disagree on this point, but I actually think the pacing in this movie was atrocious. While the topic was interesting, the characters were interesting, I wanted to see how it turned out, there were so many times where I'm like, why are you showing me this? I already know this. Especially being a movie where you see things from the different perspectives of different characters, you don't have to keep rehashing the same thing over again unless it's something new. And I think this didn't really understand that concept. You kept seeing the same reveal over and over again when you didn't need to see the reveal again. I understand the character is learning right now, but as long as we know the character learned it, you can move on. I don't need to see the entire reveal. I would say there was probably 20 to 25 minutes of this movie that didn't need to be there. And you wouldn't have lost anything. You wouldn't have lost character building. You wouldn't have lost anything. For me, that's quite a movie sin when you're that slow. It makes people lose interest. It makes people start to get restless in their seats. And it makes people just kind of get bored.
I'm going to disagree with Nick as far as his issues with the pacing. At no point in time did I ever feel like I was bored or I was slipping out of immersion or I was losing focus on what I was watching. I enjoy movies that have a little bit of a slower pace from time to time, a little bit of a slower burn. I don't feel like this movie went over the top as far as scenery chewing or anything like that. There are some movies that are pretty big offenders in this, and I don't feel like this is on that list. Now, are there some scenes that maybe could have been a little shorter? Probably, but it's not something that deterred from my viewing experience. The set pieces in this film are marvelous. The way that they chose to basically personify the time and place that they were in was absolutely breathtaking. All of the different, like the neon and all the little flares in all the different rooms, and just the way that the characters were dressed, it all just had this very period feel while also having this kind of modern spin on it, and I really appreciated that.
There is a very strong point to this, and that's the characters. The characters are very interesting. Every single one of them I wanted to know more about. At the beginning of the movie, you kind of get a little taste of all of them. You get a scene where a lot of them are together, and you kind of have this in and out and back and forth with these characters, and you're kind of making assumptions about them as you go. And that's kind of the name of this movie's game. You're making assumptions, which one of them are correct. That's kind of this movie's game. You're making assumptions as you go, but which one of those are correct? Which one of those are way off, and which one of those are you kind of on the right track? That's what this movie's all about. And when you get to the end of the movie and you're done, you can kind of look back and say, wow, I didn't see that coming. I kind of saw that coming. I was on the right track here. And that's a lot of fun. I definitely enjoyed the characters and what they were doing with the characters.
The screenplay for this movie was written very well. They have all of these twists and turns. The characters all have their own reveals and their own vantage points. And a lot of this reminded me a lot of Quentin Tarantino. Some little flashes of maybe the Coen brothers here and there as well, but Drew Goddard did an excellent job of creating a narrative, creating a story, and presenting it in a way that, while showing homage to other directors and screenwriters, while also keeping his own kind of flair to it as well, which I really appreciated. But specifically, as far as that comparison to Tarantino is concerned, I felt like there's a point in the movie where they introduce something big in the third act, where it typically doesn't end up being. And it reminded me a little bit of The Hateful Eight. The Hateful Eight has a very big reveal in the third act that kind of has some similar tones, definitely not the same thing, but there are some similar tones to it, and it presents a new threat essentially to the entire El Royale and all of its inhabitants. And it was very interesting to watch, and I felt like it kind of throws you for a loop, but I felt it was in a good way.
This movie is a bit of a mixed bag. You've got bad pacing issues, you've got the excellent characters and the interesting story. There's one other aspect that throws for a loop, and it's going to be kind of hard to talk about here because we don't do spoilers here. But there's a point in the story where the whole thing kind of takes a left turn, and they introduce a new aspect of the story. And that really threw me off because you feel like you're going in one direction, and then they add another piece to the puzzle, and you're like, well, now the whole puzzle's changed. I don't know if I necessarily like that or not. I kind of wanted to see it go in the direction it was going. It basically adding a conflict in Act 3 is very odd, and you don't see it very often.
The acting performances were stellar. Jeff Bridges, there were a few times times where he had me close to tears. And this is not that kind of movie. It's not an over-the-top drama where you're expecting to cry, a la last week's A Star Is Born. You know, you're not expecting to cry in this movie, and there were a couple of moments where I was pretty close. There were a couple of other characters as well. They said the portrayals were just amazing. It felt like they were written for these people, and they knocked it out of the park.
The acting is very well done in this movie. Especially Jeff Bridges really stood out for me. Obviously, this is a character piece. It's important that each character is interesting and dynamic, and they did a very good job with that in this movie. They did casting top-notch. I couldn't imagine any other actor playing these roles. They were perfect for these characters. These actors really nailed it. There are a couple of really emotional scenes towards the end, and it really shows the chops of Jeff Bridges and some of the other actors. It really shows the chop of some of the actors, you know, the ones that make it to the end, how they can pull these things off and really draw you into the emotion, the raw emotion of that scene. So I feel acting was a very important piece of this movie, and it was pulled off flawlessly. So overall, I'm going to give this movie a 7 out of 10. I definitely enjoyed the movie. The pacing took a big punch in the gut for me. It was many points in the movie where I'm like, would you just move on already? I don't need to see the third person discover the same thing again in length. That was my really only gripe with the movie, was the pacing. But if you watch the trailer at all like I did and was intrigued by the story and wanted to see what was going on and what the craziness was all about, I highly suggest watching this movie. And theaters is definitely a great place to do it because it is a spectacle to behold in certain points in the movie.
So we're definitely not unanimous on this one. I definitely don't feel as much that it was a mixed bag. I really liked this movie. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. I'm definitely going to see it in theaters before it leaves. I thoroughly enjoyed everything about this movie.
If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We give you multiple videos every single week. And we have t-shirts available if you're interested in those as well. Those are available down in the description below. We hope you'll follow us into the Vortex. We'll see you next time.